And all the skeptics, of course, they thought this was outrageous, this was a capitulation to the prevailing power, this was never going to produce anything remotely equitable for these poor women. And yet, 4 years later, over 400 cases have gone before this arbitration council, and if you start to map the teeth, the effectiveness of these particular decisions as they have evolved over this 4-year period, even though they have initially started out as being non-binding, they've essentially become morally binding over time. Right? Now, of course, in some sense, the end state is towards trying to craft mechanisms that will have more binding formal legal authority, but you can't go from here to there in a single bound. Right? We want the perfection. We want the end state. We want the way it works here to be the way we want it to work there. We can't help but things like that. Right? On these particular cases, on these particular problems, you've got to be thinking much more in terms of what's politically feasible now, what's supportable now, being almost agnostic in some sense with respect to what the end state is that you're actually working towards, even if there are some principles that inform what that is. Right? So on these particular types of examples, we're devolving responsibilities to at the lowest level where it can be made, where the expertise actually really resides. We're trying to put information in the hands of public, in the hands of people themselves. We're trying to work iteratively to create solutions that are the best that we can work with now. Right? Now it's taken 4 years in the case of this Cambodian case, example to work with. Right? First year, pretty ordinary. No one would ever have got promoted on the World Bank or anywhere else on the basis of the performance that was achieved, even after 2 years of doing something like this. Right? The big outcomes are now starting to appear 4 or 5 years in after doing that kind of thing. Fortunately, the managers of these particular projects were supervised by enlightened managers that gave them the kind of space that they needed to be able to resolve those kind of disputes. Right? But orthodoxy wants the best practice. What is the best practice for how we can solve this solution? That's important because we know it works there, we believe it's going to work here. Making it work here is going to help us to meet these targets now. Right? So I hope I'm being clear on those particular points. So the basic gist of it is, how can we sort out those problems for which we really don't have to reinvent the wheel, like the building of the roads in the high rainfall environments. For these kinds of problems, you do have to reinvent the wheel each and every time. Each and every issue you have to reinvent the wheel because the credibility of the decision-making apparatus is so crucial to being able to weigh the outcome. Real winners and real losers are created when you go into arbitration. Right? People walk away disappointed, furious, outraged if they don't get what they deserve. Right? Or they don't think they get what they think they deserve. All right? And extrapolate it out, that's what causes revolutions, that's what causes riots, when people get seriously ticked off with the way decision-making works. In the US here, in a couple of weeks, we have a big election, right? And hopefully, no matter who wins, the losers aren't going to go around burning the country down, right? Because in principle, we believe, we hope, that some mostly meritocratic and fair system has produced an outcome called who should be president of the United States. There are any number of ways, actually, we could choose to do that, right? And democracy itself is very pluralistic. How all the nominally democratic countries in the world choose their leaders has very different rule systems, even though it's all called democracy. How it's actually grown, how it's actually nurtured itself, how it's come to take the form that it has, is as different as each of those democratic countries. Right? It's none of these democratic countries are doing the best practice that's a replication of somewhere else. Right? They're doing something that they have organically grown themselves. And it works in that country and in that context because of that process of contestation and legitimizing that's produced it. Right? So the essence of it is, well, that's the way it's kind of come to work in rich countries. Why don't we, isn't our job, in some sense, as development agents, to help for those class of problems that need it, similar types of decision-making spaces to be worked through. Literally reinventing the wheel each time it is required for those types of problems. That's the kind of thing I think we need to be thinking much more about, and which relentless emphasis on Millennium Development Goals, best practices and toolkits and all the rest of it just completely undermines our capacity to think about these problems in the right way, let alone to respond to them in the kinds of ways I'll articulate. Let me just conclude by what I think are the short-term implications of what I've just said. The short term is there's plenty of space for refining, adapting, expanding access to and lowering the cost of some refined version of DGH, right? Called DGH 2.0. The development status kit says there's plenty of gain still to be had by extending the roads and building the microcredit systems. So in some sense, there's plenty to be done there. But what I think we need to really do in the medium run is upgrade upgrade to this 21 CD. We had to not just tweak with the existing operating system that we have. We need to really insert a whole new program in place. Right? And finally, to continue rather the computer analogy, all right, what we need to do is ditch Windows altogether. we need to get away in some sense from the basic infrastructure, the operating system that manages the way in which we make these decisions to get to a whole different thing. So the long-term challenge, and I wrote this before Sarkozy and Brown were actually literally proposing that we transform the Bretton Woods system, but I would suggest that we're going to live in a very interesting historical moment over the next 6 months or so, if in fact it really is a way of thinking about how we can transform the way in which the architecture that we have will work. The skepticism is that we still live in a world that will keep relentlessly, the imperatives of the system will keep wanting us to solve problems in this orthodox kind of way. So I think our job as researchers, our job as activists in a lot of this stuff is to try and create the space, analytically and politically, for thinking about these problems in very different ways. All right, I think the last one is on what you can do. Last slide. No, keep going. So what can you do? So this is all sort of a bit abstract, perhaps. It's how nerdy researchers think about these issues. But there is I hope you can sense some practical implications that follow from all of that. I think in the short run, before you perhaps you are at a time in your life when you're in a position to really fundamentally change a lot of how these decision-making apparatuses are set up. First thing I think you can do is just be generous with your time and money. You get a much more visceral sense of what life is like for those 3 billion people that I mentioned to you before. There shouldn't just be an abstraction. There should be people that you know. There should be experiences that you've had. As I mentioned in one of the groups today, doing some crappy work in your life is a really important part of that too. Most people in life do pretty crappy jobs for a living. In the house that we lived at in India for 6 months, we had a poor 50-year-old woman who showed up every single day to break rocks with a hammer, right? And a big tip truck literally would dump out 3 tons of rocks, and her job was to take a rock this big and turn it into a rock that big, right? In the blazing sun all hours every day, right? Right, now I'm saying you have to do that. Working at McDonald's or Burger King or something else like that will give you a sense of the kind of routinized drudgery that will either give you the fright of your life and make you realize that it's going to affect you for you if you don't do your studying. But it should also relate you, I think, to the fact that this is the kind of work that people are involved in a lot of the time. And I think you respond much more effectively when you have some tangible, visceral sense of what it is other people do. Stay informed, be hopeful, get political, but don't break anything you can't fix. Right? So there's a bit of a tension there, perhaps, between being really committed and active and activist even on those issues that you're committed to. But there's a lot of the activist impulse is always to tear down and say the system currently isn't working, which is fine. But as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, a system that's in meltdown that doesn't have a viable alternative to it, sometimes an even scarier world. So it's an argument for actually doing your homework on the solution side as much as it's not articulating the problems. Beware of anyone with a simple solution. That's as much a problem for people on the left, on the political left, as it is on people on the political right. Those from liberal arts backgrounds tend to think they're immune from believing in simple solutions and simplistically castigating people on the right for their sort of simple views of the world. Right? But any of the kind of things that I've been talking about in the first half of this talk tonight, about responding to Millennium Development Goals with proven technologies and all the rest of it, that in some sense is just a version of the same thing, right? There are always these complicated complicated realities that underpin what we're doing, just being seduced by a simple story, no matter what ideological spectrum it comes from, it's not the right way. Concretely, I think you can support short-term immigration. The evidence is point number 10 on my list to start with and go into. But there's enormous scope for really short-term enhancing the impacts of poor people's lives and the poor people's families back where they came from by supporting short-term immigration. I think that's got to be a huge, big issue for development activists, and there's no constituency that I know of that's simultaneously really pro-development and simultaneously really pro-immigration. Right? The development activists have a lot of work. You can't name a major organisation in the world, like Oxfam or CARE or any other big NGOs, that have made a huge big deal out of immigration. I think empirically, hard to name an intervention that in the short run will have a much bigger